Welcome to the SoundLott. This show is broadcasting from a dusty old abandoned record store located somewhere in the upper Midwest. Here is your host, Mike Lott.
It's the time of the week to listen to him speak, all about those tunes that make a young girl swoon. He will make you laugh and cry, and make you wanna try to recall some useless information meant to drive your imagination. His name is Mike Lott, a man who's been around. It's the SoundLott, the best show in town. He's Mike Lott, the boys just call him cool. He's Mike Lott, the girls know he's no fool. It's wrong for him to have a song just to please his ego, but he don't mind 'cause he's too blind to see he's just an average Joe. His name is Mike Lott, a man who's been around. It's the SoundLott, the best show in town. He's Mike Lott, the boys just call him cool. He's Mike Lott, the girls know he's no fool. It's wrong for him to have a song just to please his ego, but he don't mind 'cause he's too blind to see he's just an average Joe. His name is Mike Lott, a man who's been around. It's the SoundLott, the best show in town. He's Mike Lott, the boys just call him cool. He's Mike Lott, the girls know he's no fool.
All right, now everybody gets their own intro song. Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Mike Lott. I am the host of the SoundLott, and you're probably wondering what the hell is this show about? So I wanted to just kind of give you a brief introduction of myself, and see if this is something that you may be interested in listening to. I hope so, because it's going to be a fun show. So basically, I wanted to have a show that's just talking tunes, right? I mean, talking about music, and you know, with all the things going on in the world right now, let's have some conversations about some things that we all really can come together on and enjoy and love. And you know, I love hearing stories about different bands and things like that. So this show is going to be just talking about music. We're going to have some guests. We're going to discuss some situations to see if maybe we agree or disagree on certain things, recant some old stories of different bands out there, and just have a lot of fun doing it. We're going to have some games and things to test your musical intellect and see how smart you are or how much you do know. And so we're going to just have a lot of fun with this show. And to give you an idea of just my background, I've been a music lover my whole life. I was blessed enough to grow up in a home where my mom was very musical. My brother is 7 years older than I am. I grew up on a lot of his 45s, my mom's albums. My brother introduced me to all of what we call classic rock now of the 70s. And then, of course, I grew up in the 80s. So I had all of that music that I grew up with. And then my very first girlfriend, she was really into like 50s and 60s era music. And so she turned me on to that and really opened my eyes to, you know, where everything started. My mom was a big Elvis fan, and so I've been a big Elvis fan my whole life. But, you know, there's a lot of other people that influenced early rock and roll. And again, it's probably my favorite era of just music I want to listen to, because it's just fun, you know. It's about everlasting love, and it's about just having a good time and there's not a whole lot of messaging or anything to it. So that 50s and 60s era, early 60s, is still probably my favorite era of music to listen to when I'm in a good mood. And so that turned me into just wanting to learn more and more about all of that. I'm also kind of a history buff, so the two kind of go back and forth together. So I like learning about music history, just like I would any other kind of history. And then I got my big break in my life, and that was I got a job at a music store, at an actual record store. At the time that I worked there, we did not have records. It was all cassettes, and eventually we did move to CDs, which I'll tell you the story someday about how that all came about, my first experience with that. But so I worked at a music store, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of different music that I never had any access to because the radio doesn't play it. So I moved on from there and actually worked for those of you guys in Minneapolis. There, if you remember, the store was called Great American Music, and I loved working there. And so I ended up, they ended up getting bought out, and so I worked for the big corporation that bought them out called Transworld Corporation, and eventually went on to manage a store that they have called Music Avenue. And again, really enjoyed seeing all the new music coming out. I can recant stories for you guys about when the New Kids on the Block album came out, when the new Garth Brooks album would come out, things like that, just how crazy it had gotten. But the best thing that came out of that whole experience for me is that I'd hired a part-timer that ended up becoming one of my best friends in the world. And his name is Mike Garrison, and we've been friends for, I think, 30 years now. Maybe even a little bit longer than that. And Mike is the one that really turned me into more of the musical side of the business. And, you know, Mike took the time to teach me how to play guitar, and it didn't take me long after learning a few chords to start writing my own music. And so then I moved into doing that. I recorded a couple of albums of original stuff that I've written, and then I was in a band with Mike for, I think it was around 15 years, and I ended up moving to Texas. I lived in Texas for 7 years. Didn't do anything musical down there, which is crazy because I was in Austin. But then recently moved back to Minneapolis, and I'm happy to be home. It's where I belong. But that's kind of just my story of, I kind of feel like I come from a different perspective, where I do have the performer side, I have the writing side, I have the historical side. And so I think I can bring a lot to the table for you guys and help host and maybe even mediate some arguments about music, because there are a lot of them out there. And so we're gonna talk about a couple things right off the bat. So I have two major topics that I wanted to touch on today myself, and then like I said, we'll play some games and do some fun stuff in between. But something happened to me recently that got me really ticked off, and it doesn't take a lot when it comes to arguing music. But I'd heard an interview with Bryan Adams on Sirius XM. I think it was the Classic Rewind show that they have on Sirius. And he was being interviewed talking about, you know, working with Tina Turner, and a lot of really cool. It was a really cool interview. If you get a chance to check it out, I would. But one of the questions that came out of it that really shocked me was that Bryan Adams is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I know we've got the vote coming up here at the end of the month, and you know, I have my own views about who I think should be in the Hall of Fame, but I started digging into this because I'm kind of like, how on earth is Bryan Adams not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? You know what I mean? Like, he is one of the biggest stars of the 80s, and so I started looking into it, and when I started looking into who is in the Hall of Fame and who is not in the Hall of Fame, I know we all complain about this kind of stuff, but I mean, some of these things, Dolly Parton is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I don't understand it. To me, it's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so I look at that as it should be on its face, right? It should be what it is. You would not put Babe Ruth in the NFL Hall of Fame or the NBA Hall of Fame. It doesn't work. So there's a few, and I'm just gonna go down the list right now of some of the people that I was absolutely shocked that are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, I'll go right off the bat and say A Tribe Called Quest, Tupac, Jay-Z, LL Cool J. That those don't belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's nothing rock and roll about those guys, and for me, if something of theirs is not played on a classic rock and roll radio station, then you shouldn't be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Unless it's for some other reason, like you were a producer of a great, classic rock albums or something like that. Which we can talk about that too, because Rick Rubin's not in there. But there's some other ones that, so to me, I like those get kicked out right away. That they just don't belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But there was a few, I mentioned Dolly, I mentioned Willie, Willie Nelson's another one. I've known Willie, most of Willie's career. I love Willie Nelson. I can't think of other than he did an album with Leon Russell, where Willie would again deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Songwriters Hall of Fame, Country Hall of Fame, sure. He certainly belongs in both those, but Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it just makes no sense to me. So then I started digging in and kind of just going off the top of my head, like who is not on this list too, and going, let's start comparing apples to apples. So I'm going to give you a couple names. And again, you may completely disagree with me on this, and I'm fine with that. Leave the comments, in the comments below on what your thoughts are on all of this. But here's a couple that jumped out at me. Cher is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, I'm okay with that if the bands that I'm going to tell you about going forward are also in. I can see Cher being a borderline, and I'm really struggling even with that. But she does, she goes all the way back to the mid-'60s with I Got You, Babe. And, Believe was a huge hit for her. And If I Could Turn Back Time, just like Jesse James. I mean, she's got enough songs that I think she is a very important person in popular music. But Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Dave Matthews Band is another one. I know there's some people that love Dave Matthews. They hate Dave Matthews. I grew up in that era where I understand how popular Dave Matthews is. He does not belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in my opinion. Elvis Costello is another one. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, I don't know everything about Elvis Costello from a sense of, I know he's done a lot of production, and I know he's written some stuff for other people. So maybe there's a side to Elvis Costello that I don't know about that might lead him to deserve being in there. But if it's just straight from his musical catalog, no, not even a chance of being in there. I don't think Green Day should be in there. Again, they were influential. They had a few hits, kind of brought that punk thing back. But, again, I think you've got to be around a little bit longer, and you got to produce a little bit more for me to think that you belong, with a bronze bust of yourself. 9 Inch Nails is another one. I love 9 Inch Nails. I love Trent Reznor, but I don't think that's worthy of being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Sheryl Crow is another one where I think that's just literally that's politics. Sheryl Crow's had a great career and she's had a few hits. But if you go down, to me, what I look at is sometimes it's just what's the criteria, Did you make a huge impact? Did you have a song that was kind of the sound of your era? Have you been around for a long, long time and had lots and lots and lots of hits? I just don't think Sheryl Crow has made that big of an impact on rock and roll, in my opinion, other than dating Eric Clapton. And then Randy Newman. Again, I'm going to guess Randy Newman is in for some kind of writing or production side, because the only song that was ever a big hit for Randy Newman that I can remember was Short People, and the chorus is literally short people have no reason to live. So it's kind of tongue in cheek, but I'm like, Randy Newman? So what I decided to do is that I decided to look at just write down a list of bands that I can't not believe are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And what I've noticed is there is an absolute shutting out of 80s bands even some really, really good 70s bands. But the 80s are really getting screwed in all of this stuff. And I'm sorry, guys, I'm 56 years old. The 80s were a long time ago. So it's not like it's so, it's so new that that doesn't belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So I don't know what's going on with a lot of that with the 80s. Because when I name off some of these 70s and 80s bands and artists, I think you're going to be shocked that they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, honestly. So what I've done is I've compiled a list of kind of I call it what it is. It's the tale of the tape. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a tale of tape on the very first artist that we just talked about that I cannot believe is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So here is his tale of the tape. You tell me if he belongs in there.
Here is the tale of the tape on Bryan Adams. His debut album was in 1980. He has had 18 studio albums and 7 live albums, along with 11 top 10 singles, with the songs Straight from the Heart, Run to You, Summer of '69, Heat of the Night, Can't Stop This Thing, We Started, Please Forgive Me, and I Finally Found Someone, with Barbra Streisand. The song, Heaven, made it to #1 for 3 weeks in 1985, and the song, Everything I Do It For You, reached #1 in 1991 for 17 weeks. In 1993, Adams teamed with Rod Stewart and Sting to release another #1 hit song, All for Love, which stayed #1 for 3 weeks. And finally, in 1995, Adams hit #1 again with the song, Have You Ever Really Loved a Woman?, which stayed at #1 for 5 weeks. That is the tale of the tape.
That is the tale of the tape. And think about that for a second. Bryan Adams had 4 #1 hits. One, Everything I Do It For You. 17 weeks that song was on the charts. It's an incredible tale of the tape when you look at Bryan Adams' career. Again, I think he is a big face of the 1980s, with hits like Cuts Like a Knife and then, the Reckless, his second biggest album, or big album that came out after Cuts Like a Knife. I think that was 84. Had Run to You and Heaven and Summer of '69, It's Only Love with Tina Turner. These are really great songs, and he had a really great string of good albums and good singles. There is absolutely no reason that you can give me. This one, I'm going to stick my heels in the sand. There's no reason that you can give me that Bryan Adams is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So here's another one. Now, this is a 60s and 70s band that, again, I cannot believe they are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when you look at the other bands of that era that are in there. And it's starting to feel like, I didn't do this on purpose, but it's starting to feel like maybe there's an anti-Canada movement here in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So here's the next tale of the tape.
Here is the tale of the tape on the band, The Guess Who. Their debut album was in 1966. They have had 14 studio albums and 1 live album, along with 7 top 10 singles, with the songs These Eyes, Laughing, No Time, Share the Land, and Clap for the Wolfman. The song, American Woman, with the B-side No Sugar Tonight, made it to #1 for 3 weeks in 1970. That is the tale of the tape.
Does that blow you away as much as it did me that the Guess Who are not in there? Again, American Woman is one of the most popular songs that came out of that entire era. It's up there with Born to Be Wild and some of those other just classic songs. Lenny Kravitz did a cover of it. But the cool thing with the Guess Who is they were able to do kind of that folky thing, rocky thing, Crosby, Stills, Nash kind of. They were a really, really good band. And I'm sorry, but the song These Eyes is still one of my favorite songs in the whole world, just the way he sings that, So again, I'm going to challenge you because I picked out specifically 5 bands that I will not take a back seat to that these guys should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And the Guess Who are another one that I just cannot believe. How can you honestly justify? And I don't get me wrong, guys. I'm as big of a Doors fan as anybody you'll ever find. But when you actually start comparing songs and looking at, where they charted, all of that kind of stuff, the Guess Who are honestly, I think, comparable to the Doors when you look at kind of the way they're where they stacked up on their music. And now, I like the Doors better, but again, are the Doors in simply because Jim Morrison and the whole mystique about his death? I believe some of that. So it's just sad to me that the Guess Who are not in there. So just to let you know, like I'd said before, both Bryan Adams and the Guess Who are from Canada. So starting to see a trend that's a little bit disturbing to me. But so here's the next one. And again, this is where I'm going down this road of the 1980s just are not getting their respect. How this band is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is ridiculous. Here we go.
Here is the tale of the tape on the band Motley Crue. Their debut album was in 1981. They have had 9 studio albums and 3 live albums, along with 2 top 10 singles with the songs Dr. Feelgood and Without You. Their debut album, Too Fast for Love, went platinum along with 3 other albums. Shout at the Devil, Theater of Pain, and Girls, Girls, Girls have gone 4 times platinum and
4
won
times.
Dr. Feelgood 6 times platinum.
6 times
That
platinum.
is the tale of the tape.
So you've got 3 albums that have gone 4 times platinum and one that's gone 6. I'll be honest, when I did the research on this one, I was a little shocked that the Crue didn't have more top 40 hits. I was a little bit surprised by that, but just the staggering impact that Motley Crue made from a hair band situation. Again, you talk about bands that that define an era. Motley Crue is the epitome of every hair band that came through, from the drinking, the partying, the sex. Everything about Motley Crue was, the decadence of rock and roll, which is what they named their greatest hits. So the Motley Crue not being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is it's ridiculous at this point. Again, you're going to put Sheryl Crow in, but you're not going to put Motley Crue in. It's ridiculous. And so, again, the 3 that I've got so far that I'm not going to argue with anybody about it. These 3 all deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and that's Bryan Adams, the Guess Who, and Motley Crue. My next one is probably, I can say this. I think I can say this out loud. I think the band I was the most shocked that was not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Here is the tale of the tape on these guys.
Here is the tale of the tape on the band Styx. Their debut album was in 1972. They have had 17 studio albums and 8 top 10 singles with the songs Lady, Come Sail Away, The Best of Times, Too Much Time on My Hands, Mr. Roboto, Don't Let It End, and Show Me the Way. The song Babe made it to number 1 for 2 weeks in 1979. That is the tale of the tape.
That is the tale of the tape. 17 albums. I mean, all those songs that The Best of Times, Too Much Time on My Hands, Renegade, Come Sail Away, which wasn't even listed on there, Babe and Lady. This is a band that I honestly could not believe was not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, I will give one caveat to that. Now, if they got booted because of the song Mr. Roboto, I could maybe listen to that as an argument that, all the great music that came before 1983 and Mr. Roboto or Kilroy was here, the album, I could maybe hear that, but it's staggering to me that Styx is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, they are such an amazing band, and when you've got a guy that could go lady, da, la, 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 come on, it's like when you think of 70s, it Styx, right? It's crazy. So, and then the last one again. So I'm just going to recap. Bryan Adams, the Guess Who, Motley Crue, and Styx. None of them are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I will not argue with anyone about it. So you can leave the comments that you want, and I'm fine with that. I would love that you leave comments. But these are 5 artists I'm not going to argue with anybody about. Now, I will tell you this. The last one, again, I could engage in an argument with it, but I'm not going to. And I'll be honest with you guys. It's a personal thing for me. I really, really love this guy. And, you can argue that his album Don't Say No is one of the greatest albums ever released. He had longevity. He had some really, really giant hits, songs that we all know. And so my final of the 5 that I picked out specifically that I won't argue with anybody about, here's the last tale of the tape.
Here is the tale of the tape on Billy Squier. His debut album was in 1980. He has had 9 studio albums and 2 live albums, along with 7 top 10 AOR charted singles, with the songs The Stroke, In the Dark, All Night Long, Don't Say You Love Me, and She Goes Down. In 1982, the song Everybody Wants You went number 1 on the mainstream rock charts, and in 1984, the song Rock Me Tonight also went number 1. That is the tale of the tape.
So I'm gonna throw a challenge out there for anybody that is not aware of Billy Squier. Again, we all know something by Billy Squier. I can guarantee you, whether it be The Stroke or Everybody Wants You, Rock Me Tonight. Here's my challenge to you if you're not familiar with him. I would ask you to download the album Don't Say No and tell me after finishing listening to that album if it's not one of the greatest of its era. For those of you that don't remember what was on that album, it starts with In the Dark, and then you've got My Kind of Lover, What Do You Want From Me, The Stroke is on that. One of my favorite, Lonely Is the Night. I mean, those are 5 of the best songs that came out of that era, and they're all on the same album. So again, it's one that I'm not going to be willing to argue with anybody about. Billy Squier definitely belongs in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So now what I wanted to do is I wanted to go, I wanted to focus and give you guys the tale of the tape on those and let you hear the actual statistics to what I can argue why those guys are on. There's a lot more bands and artists that I can make the same case for. I'm not going to do it because it's going to drag on a little bit too long. But here's some more that I've highlighted that I do not have the tale of the tape for them, but I don't think I need it. The next one is Bad Company, which I think Bad Company may be on the list this year to at least vote for them. I think the voting for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ends in somewhere the last week of April. And so we'll see if Bad Company gets in. Again, it's one of those bands that Paul Rodgers is such an influential frontman, such a great singer. They had so many really great songs that I don't know how you can argue that again, does Bad Company does not belong in there, but Green Day does. It's frustrating for me. The other one that was really shocking, the one again that I was really blown away that was not in there was Eddie Money. Eddie Money's had a lot of great hits, and he's had, and he's done well on the pop charts with his hits too. Going back to his first album, with 2 Tickets to Paradise and Baby Hold On, 2 of my favorite songs of the era. But then you get into the songs in the 80s and he, Take Me Home Tonight and all that. I mean, he really does. When you look at his tale of the tape, it is shocking. He had a lot more hits than I think people know he did. Another band, talking about the 80s, I'm really surprised Huey Lewis and the News are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think they've got the numbers and the hits to deserve to be in there. Again, if we're comparing them to Elvis Costello from the same era, how on earth do you not put Huey Lewis and the News in? They had a bunch of major hits, plus they're tied to the Back to the Future movies. So from a pop culture standpoint, Huey Lewis was important during that time. So again, just shocked from a music standpoint. And this is just rock and roll bands, guys. Kenny Loggins is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think that's surprising, considering, he started with Loggins and Messina. He had a pretty big hit with Your Mama Don't Dance with that. How many big hits and talk about pop culture. You talk about 80s movies. And I mean, literally Kenny Loggins is the guy who sang and wrote 3 of the biggest songs out of all movie history soundtracks, right? You've got Top Gun with Danger Zone, probably the most popular. Footloose, the song from that movie. And then a lot of people forget the song I'm All Right from Caddyshack was a song on that soundtrack. And it's like, these are three of the biggest songs on the three of the biggest movies of that entire era. So, and Kenny's done a lot of other stuff too, besides just the soundtrack songs that I think make him very worthy. Genesis is in, but Phil Collins is not solo-wise. I'm personally not the hugest fan of Phil Collins, but I understand the popularity, and I grew up in that era, and every other song seemed to be a Phil Collins song when he went solo. Of course, Phil kind of went back and forth between having pop songs with Genesis and Phil Collins during that time, so some stuff you might not even know, was it Phil Collins or was it Genesis? But I certainly think he's worthy of being, for God's sakes, In the Air Tonight should make you almost worthy of being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Another band from that era, REO Speedwagon. Again, just shake my head. I have no idea how REO Speedwagon's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Sammy Hagar, his solo career. We have a thing coming up later where we talk about Sammy, but Sammy's had 14 solo albums after Montrose and before Van Halen. So he had a lot of really great hits on his own. So I would like to see for Sammy that he get a standalone induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Scorpions, another band. I'm literally perplexed on how the Scorpions are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So those are the ones that I kind of highlighted and just went, man, every one of these should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'll even include Iron Maiden into that, which is part of what I call kind of my B list. But here's the other bands that I thought of off the top of my head, just kind of going, okay, these are the bands that I think should be in there, or at least be considered, right? And these are all arguable to me. I will argue with anybody on whether they belong there or not, because you can make an argument that they don't, but I think they should at least be considered. And again, I'm comparing this to Dave Matthews, Green Day, Elvis Costello, and Sheryl Crow. Those are kind of the four that I'm like, did these guys make a bigger impact than those four artists? Are they more memorable? Will their music live on longer than those four? And so one is Alan Parsons. Again, I'm okay that Alan Parsons is not in the Hall of Fame, but I think you could talk about it. Bachman Turner Overdrive, another huge band. Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Blue Oyster Cult, Boz Scaggs. Now, I love Canned Heat, but I love it just more for their influence during that time period than necessarily all the hits that they had. Devo, the Hall likes bands like Devo. I'm shocked they're not in there. Ronnie James Dio, or Dio the band. Don McLean, that's a surprising one to me. George Thorogood, I think you could argue. Grand Funk Railroad. We talked about Iron Maiden, Jethro Tull. One that does actually surprise me that never made it in there, and maybe some of you don't know his stuff very much, but Jim Croce was a really, really great songwriter, and he had a number of hits before he died. So Jim Croce, I think you could argue, could be in there. Kansas, the band Kansas, for sure. One that people forget about is Little River Band. You go and pull their tail of the tape. Little River Band, I think, had 12, 15 hits or something crazy. Really, really, really good songs and big songs. Reminiscing, Help Is On Its Way. Songs that did really well on the charts too. So I think that's kind of one of those underground bands that'll never make it in, but I think you could make the case. Loverboy, that's another one that I'm just shocked hasn't gotten any consideration. Meatloaf, just because it's Meatloaf. Poison, we start getting into the hair bands. And I don't think every hair band should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I do think there are a handful that certainly belong in there. For me personally, if I had to choose, let's say they gave me 5, Motley Crue for sure would be in there. Kiss is already in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so I'm thinking just specific hair bands. And I didn't prepare this ahead of time, so I'm going off the top of my head. But, for me, I like the early hair bands more than the later ones. Poison is right on that cusp for me. So, for me, when I think of the really, really great hair bands that came out early on, it was Motley Crue, it was Rat, Dawkins. I'm okay with Poison being in that because they did have a number of hits. I love Night Ranger. Some of those bands are the ones that I think would deserve to be in there more than like a Warrant or even Skid Row, a band like that. The other bands that I can't believe, Steppenwolf, I think you can certainly make an argument Steppenwolf should be in there. Magic Carpet Ride and Born to Be Wild are two. I mean, Born to Be Wild may be the most popular song of that whole era. Steve Winwood, I'm shocked that Steve Winwood is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Ted Nugent, and I know why Ted will never get in there. And again, I think that's one on the cusp, right? I mean, Ted didn't have a ton of hits, but Ted was rock and roll. He's the Motor City Madman, and I think he should be at least getting some consideration for it. And then, of course, the band Toto. That one is just disgraceful to me that the band Toto is not in there, and I know I may be a little bit biased on that because I just think Toto is one of the best bands that has ever recorded music in rock and roll. So there's my arguments, guys. So going back to the 5. So all of those bands, I picked out 5 that I just think is ridiculous that they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right? You've got Bryan Adams. The tail of the tape on Bryan Adams is it's inarguable. The Guess Who, Motley Crue, Styx, and Billy Squier. Those are the 5. I could have interchanged some of those with a couple other ones that I mentioned. But those are the 5 that I'm sticking to that certainly should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I would love your thoughts. So share your comments for me. Let's start this argument. We might bring it back. We'll do it. We'll bring it back up on the show that I do after the Hall of Fame inductees get brought in, and I don't have the list in front of me, so forgive me. But I know Billy Idol is in there. There's a couple other. What really started me, just to give you a little bit of context to this, what really started me on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame rant was in 2015 they inducted Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, and I have never been a big fan of Joan Jett, so I will tell you that right up front. I think her stuff is, it's catchy. I Love Rock and Roll was probably one of the big theme songs of my early youth, my early teenage years. That and Mickey by Tony Basil, and there's a few songs in there. But I Love Rock and Roll is a great song, and it'll take the test of time. But I think she had 2 other hits. I Hate Myself for Loving You and Bad Reputation, I think, are the only other. I don't include a cover of Crimson and Clover. I don't even include that. Joan Jett does not belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, okay? But I'm going to set that aside and just accept it and be like, okay, that's fine. I guess they're using her song to do the Sunday Night Football theme. Maybe that gets you in the Hall of Fame. But the tragedy to me, the real tragedy to that was when I looked it up, because I couldn't believe Joan Jett got in. And when I looked it up, Pat Benatar was not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She has been since inducted. I think it was last year, 23 or 24. But Joan Jett, not only was she inducted before Pat Benatar, but I'm talking like 10 years before. And there is nobody that can make a valuable argument on why Pat Benatar, who had like 25 top 10 hits or some crazy number, and again, growing up in that era, you take a look at the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High, probably the greatest movie of my youth, talking about my youth, right? And there's a scene in there where there's girls that are dressed up like Pat Benatar. I mean, Pat Benatar had such a huge influence on the pop culture. She was one of the very first real ass-kicking rock and roll gals. Hit Me With Your Best Shot is like a female anthem from that era. And Pat Benatar just had it all. She's got a beautiful voice. When she wants to do a ballad, in my opinion, We Belong is the greatest ballad that came out of the 80s, in my opinion. But she could do something like Fire and Ice or Hit Me With Your Best Shot, and then do something beautiful like We Belong. And I that was what got me really pissed off. I was like, I don't think Joan Jett belongs in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but she certainly, under no circumstances, and I don't care about the whole, because I know what you guys are going to say, well, she was in the Runaways with Lita Ford, and who cares? Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's supposed to be based on what you have accomplished. And Pat Benatar has kicked Joan Jett's ass in so many different ways that I can't even tell you. In pop culture, in record sales, in top 40 hits, in influence, it's just insane to me. And that was when I started turning my attention more towards the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and really calling it out that this is ridiculous on how they determine this stuff. And I know that they claim, it's the people who vote. Maybe we need to take that away then. I'm okay with having a group of musicians who respect and understand the business and the history of it, making the determination of who goes into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame instead of just having some online vote. Because that's a tragedy. It's a miscarriage of justice to have Joan Jett get into the Hall of Fame before Pat Benatar.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode of the SoundLott.
I figured if we whispered that maybe, kind of give you like that subliminal message. So make sure you do subscribe, please. I'd really, oh my goodness, my mic just took a massive turn on me. I'd really love to keep doing this show and get more and more of your input, because my plan long term would be to get as much of you guys running this show than I am, because I think it's really fun to be able to have some kind of an interactive program where we can talk about music, and I think for younger people, it's going to be really great to hear some of the stories about some of these bands that you may not even know. And it might be one of those things where you're just like, wow, I didn't have any idea. And it's not me just being an old guy talking about back in my day, because I went through the same thing with the people that I listened to growing up in the music. And, I got really into Roy Orbison because of a former brother-in-law who was really into Roy. I mean, I knew some of the songs that Roy did with, Pretty Woman and stuff, but it was like, you never know who is going to turn you on to something that's really, really impactful to your life. And I've had a few people in my life that have done that. And I'm going to give a shout out right now to my former Great American Music coworker, Chris Larson. Chris, if you're out there, Chris is the one that turned me on to Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I'm talking 3 years before Stevie Ray Vaughan was very popular. I think Soul to Soul had just come out when he turned me on to Stevie Ray Vaughan, and I'm forever grateful for it. I know Stevie later became very, very popular, but if he hadn't, he still would have turned me on to especially that first Texas Flood album. I listened to that thing over and over and over again, and so I owe him a lot, because I would never have been turned on to Stevie Ray Vaughan until much later in my life. After Steve had gotten a little bit more popular with the album In Step. But, he's one. Chris Morris was a guy that I worked with who turned me on to Chris Isaak. I'm probably the world's largest Chris Isaak fan. He's one of those kind of guys that either you know him or you don't know who he is. But I would never... And the funny thing is, and I always say this when I talk about it, the very first song that Chris played me of Chris Isaak was not Wicked Game. Because that's usually like, well, everybody fell in love with Chris Isaak after listening to Wicked Game. It wasn't. It was a song called San Francisco Days, was the very first Chris Isaak song that I had ever heard. And then I listened to that album, which is the one that came after the album that had Wicked Game on it. So I heard Wicked Game later down the line. And then, of course, that song is so iconic. It's crazy, but So you never know who's going to influence you or who's going to turn you on to someone that's really going to make a big difference in your life on how you listen to music and how much you love certain things. So that's what I hope to do with this podcast, and I really would like to have your input as much as possible. I am going to have some guests. I'm hoping to have some really fun guests. One of them that I'm going to have on for sure is my friend Kyle, who we have known each other since we were probably, 12 years old. We did so many things together musically. It was such a huge soundtrack to our lives that I'm excited to talk and share our stories with you guys, because I think you'll relate. But I also think you'll be entertained by some of the crazy things we did that had to do with music. So, you know what? I forgot to do this earlier, and forgive me, folks. But every week when I do the show, I like to do something that we're going to call, This Week in Music History, and it's going to just kind of go through the stuff that happened at this time of the year, specifically this week at some other point in history, and how important that was. And this week is absolutely is a huge week for some things that happen, both good and bad. And so I'm going to get to it right now. Here is This Week in History.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
A date that will live in infamy.
It's time for your history lesson. This Week in History is presented by Rumpus, the compass that always points towards roast beef.
Here are the headlines for the week. In 1964, the Beatles set a U.S. chart record by occupying the first 5 places on the Billboard Hot 100. Can't Buy Me Love was at the top, followed by their debut single, Love Me Do, at number 2, and their cover of Chuck Berry's Roll Over Beethoven at number 3. I Want to Hold Your Hand held the number 4 position, while Please Please Me was at number 5. In 1964, the Beach Boys began recording I Get Around, which would soon become their first number 1 hit on the Billboard charts. Released the following month, the autobiographical song found the band reacting to their newfound fame. In 1966, David Bowie, born David Jones, released his maiden solo single, Do Anything You Say, on the Pie label. Produced by Tony Hatch, it was his first recording under his new stage name. In 1970, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young topped the U.S. albums chart with their debut offering, Deja Vu. The album yielded 3 top 40 U.S. hits, Teach Your Children, Our House, and a version of Joni Mitchell's Woodstock. In 1977, Fleetwood Mac topped the Billboard 200 with their 11th studio album, Rumors, featuring such enduring top 10 hits as Go Your Own Way, Dreams, Don't Stop, and You Make Loving Fun. The Grammy-winning album would become the band's most successful release, eventually spending more than 20 non-consecutive years on the U.S. chart and selling more than 40 million copies worldwide. In April 1984, Motown icon Marvin Gaye died after being fatally shot by his father during a heated altercation over mislaid insurance documents. The shooting, which occurred one day before Gaye's 45th birthday, came at a time when the Washington, D.C.-born singer and songwriter was enjoying a career resurgence, sparked by the success of his 1982 single, Sexual Healing, and its parent album, Midnight Love. In 1985, Van Halen's charismatic frontman David Lee Roth quit the band after 6 albums. Famed solo artist and ex-Montrose singer Sammy Hagar would go on to replace him in the band. In 1985, the charity single We Are the World was broadcast simultaneously on more than 5,000 radio stations worldwide. Performed by USA for Africa, a superstar collective led by Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson, the song hit number 1 and became the fastest-selling single in America. Proceeds from the song, as well as merchandise sales and private donations, raised more than $50 million for humanitarian aid in Africa. In April 1994, 27-year-old Kurt Cobain took his own life at his Seattle home. He helped form the band Nirvana in Aberdeen, Washington in 1987, a band that patented a uniquely gritty fusion of punk and heavy metal that became known as grunge. The hugely influential band recorded 3 albums, the most famous of which was 1991's Nevermind, which included their anthem, top 10 U.S. hit single, Smells Like Teen Spirit. And those are your headlines for the week.
We hope you enjoy our show and ask that you please subscribe so you never miss an episode of the SoundLott. Thank you for your support.
What a crazy week in music, huh? I mean, when you think about, Marvin Gaye dying, he was murdered by his father, Kurt Cobain taking his own life, the We Are the World single being released, Fleetwood Mac Rumors, arguably, I mean, most people would probably tell you it's certainly top 10 greatest album ever recorded. David Lee Roth leaving Van Halen. I mean, that all happened in this week at, obviously different years, but April obviously is a big time for big time things to happen in rock and roll. So thank you for listening to This Week in Music History. I'm going to try doing that every show just to kind of give us some perspective. Now I'm going to move on to a really fun game, and I hope you guys will really enjoy this game. There's a few games that I have coming up, and then after the game, I think we're gonna do a question of the day, and that's where I'm gonna throw and actually ask for you guys to please write in on the comments what your thoughts are specifically about the specific question of the day, and then we can open it up and maybe talk about it more next week when we kind of get the results back from everybody. But let's play our very first game.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention? I want to invite you all as my intention. It's a real fun game, that's what the neighbors say. It's called Whose Album Is It Anyway?
So this is how the game will go. We will choose one album from every decade from the 1970s to the 2000s. We will give you clues to see if you can figure out what album we are talking about. Each clue will make it easier to figure out. But beware, there's only 6 clues.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention? I want to invite you all as my intention. It's a real fun game, that's what the neighbors say. It's called Whose Album Is It Anyway?
Let's do this thing.
Here are the clues for the album of the 1970s.
Clue number 1. It was originally released on Pyramid Records, but later re-released in June 1975 by A&M Records. Clue number 2. It was the band's debut album and was certified gold in September 1978. Clue number 3, originally known as the Time-Ations. The band was formed by singer John Schlitt, guitarist Danny Piper, keyboardist Roger Boyd, bassist Larry Boyd, and drummer Steve Houston. Clue number 4, the photograph of the diner on the back cover of the album is the Right Way Diner, which is still open today in Olivet, Missouri. Clue number 5, singer John Schlitt was fired due to drug dependency. He would later recover, become a born-again Christian, and reappear as the lead singer of the contemporary Christian music band Petra. Clue number 6, The album had one big hit song, Never Been Any Reason, which was featured in the 1993 film Dazed and Confused and 2005 film Sahara. AC/DC also admitted to being influenced by the riff when they wrote their big hit, You Shook Me All Night Long. Whose album is it anyway?
Head East, Flat as a Pancake.
Clue number 1, it was released in 1983 on Berserkly Records. Clue number 2, the album marks the group's first lineup change since 1975, with Greg Douglas taking over as lead guitar player after the departure of Dave Carpenter. Clue number 3, it features the band's only top 10 hit, which was later parodied by Weird Al Yankovic in 1984. Clue number 4, the hit song on the album peaked at number 2 on the Billboard charts, but was unable to knock off Michael Jackson's Beat It off the number 1 spot. Clue number 5, the band leader used his name in most of his album names, such as Continued, Citizen Kin, and Rock Kin Roll. Clue number 6, the album featured the huge hit Jeopardy and Love Never Fails, which cracked the top 100. Whose album is it anyway?
The Greg Kihn Band, Kinspiracy.
Here are the clues for the album of the 1990s.
Clue number 1, the band was formed in 1986 in Columbia, South Carolina, at the University of South Carolina. Clue number 2, the band's debut album was released in July 1994 by Atlantic Records and was the best-selling album of 1995, beating the second-place TLC album Crazy Sexy Cool by 2.2 million copies. Clue number 3, the band won the Grammy Award for Best New Artist and Best Pop Performance by a duo or group with vocals. Clue number 4, the lead singer eventually left the band and has since become a big crossover star into country music. Clue number 5, the follow-up albums, Fairweather Johnson, Musical Chairs, and Looking for Lucky never reached the heights of this debut album. Clue number 6, the album spawned 3 top 10 Hot 100 singles in the US, with songs Only Wanna Be With You, Let Her Cry and Hold My Hand. Whose album is it anyway?
Hootie and the Blowfish, Cracked Rear View.
Here are the clues for the album of the 2000s.
Clue number 1, this album was released on October 4th, 2005 on Roadrunner Records. Clue number 2, it is the band's best-selling album to date and was certified diamond in 2017. Clue number 3, it was the band's first album with Three Doors Down drummer Daniel Adair. Clue number 4, the album was the 3rd straight #1 album for the band in their native country of Canada. Clue number 5, 2 of their other best-selling albums were Silver Side Up and The Long Road. Clue number 6, the album spawned 5 top 20 Hot 100 singles in the US with songs Savin' Me, Rock Star, Photograph, Far Away, and If Everyone Cared. Whose album is it anyway?
Nickelback. All the right reasons.
Hey, thank you for playing the game. Tell me, did you master every decade? Next week, won't you join in and play? Whose album is it anyway? Whose album is it anyway? Whose album is it anyway?
Well, we know one thing. Nickelback, being from Canada, will never make it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm kidding. If you hadn't listened earlier, I was ranting about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and that two of the most famous artists to come out of Canada, Bryan Adams and the Guess Who, have not made it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But there you go. That is whose album is it anyway? I know that that there was a couple really easy ones in that one. I think the Hootie and the Blowfish and the Nickelback ones were really easy. The Head East, I thought I'm going to hit you right between the eyes right off the bat. So if you guys got the Head East album, I'm especially impressed by that. The Greg Kihn album is not exactly an easy one to get either. So put in the comments how you did. Did you get them right for all the different decades? Because that was a hard one. So we've got a couple more games coming up, but right now, yeah, it's time for you to participate in the question of the day, and the question of the day has to do with...
It's Diamond Dave
I can barely see the road from the heat coming on.
versus Sammy Hagar. The Van Halen feud.
That's what it is that we're talking about. We're talking about the Van Halen feud. Now, most people know, if you're a big fan of Van Halen, that there's been a lot of stuff that's been going on over the years between the original singer for the band, David Lee Roth, and the replacement singer, Sammy Hagar. There's not a lot of love between the two of them. But so here's the question of the day. I'm going to give you guys just a little bit of background on Van Halen itself. I know it sounds crazy because most everybody knows, but there might be maybe a piece or two in here that maybe you don't know. But Eddie had originally met David Lee Roth back in 1972 when they formed a band called Mammoth. Now in 74, they had actually replaced their bassist in Mammoth. His guy's name was Mike Stone, with Michael Anthony, and changed the name to Van Halen. That was in 74. Then in 1978, their debut self-titled album came out and climbed all the way to number 19 on the charts, going gold and then eventually platinum, which was crazy for a debut album. I think a lot of people would put, if you're going to rank debut albums, I think that you would probably put Van Halen's first album in the top 5, if not the top 3 all time. The story goes that, Eddie and Alex, who were the two brothers who made the name Van Halen, that they were neither one of them were big fans of David Lee Roth, but the story goes that David had a really good sound system at the time, and so they let him into the band just for his sound system. So, I mean, it worked. Again, they had a bunch of big hits. But in 1983, Eddie Van Halen had built a studio in his, I believe it's outside of his home, a separate studio called 5150. David Lee Roth resented him once he built that because he really did feel like Eddie had kind of complete creative autonomy at that point. In that normally they had kind of written together as a band. This time it was Eddie kind of working solo. And David Lee didn't like it. He also didn't like, in 1984, when they released the album 1984, that Eddie was adding synthesizers and keyboards. And, David Lee Roth was quoted as saying he felt that it was more pop style and radio friendly, and he didn't care for that direction the band was going. Now, of course, in 1984, the one song that was really based on a synthesizer was Jump, and made a huge amount of money for Roth and the rest of the band. It's probably their biggest radio hit to date. So what David Lee decided to do is he decided to go the next year to release a solo EP in I believe it was 85, called Crazy from the Heat. He left the band to go work on a movie that was supposedly based on this album. I don't think it ever got into production, but he was quoted as saying, I can't work with you guys anymore. I want to do my movie. Maybe when I'm done, we'll get back together. And I think that's what David Lee Roth's intention was to go off to Hollywood, and then he'd get back together with Van Halen when he was done with that project. In the meantime, Eddie said, adios, you're done. And they started looking for, a new frontman. And it's crazy when you hear some of the names that Eddie Van Halen was looking at. Patti Smythe was one of them, if you're familiar with the band Scandal. She also had some solo stuff, but just to try to imagine Van Halen with a female singer would have been interesting. Also, Eric Martin from the band Mr. Big, they had auditioned him to replace Roth. But he ended up running into, and there's been a couple different stories. I've heard Sammy tell the story where Eddie and him both shared the same mechanic, and it was the mechanic that kind of told Eddie, hey, why don't you give Sammy a call? He may be interested in joining the band. And, the other story is that they ran into each other at the mechanic shop. I'm not sure which story is the truth because I've heard them both ways. But either way, they got together and they jammed for about 20 minutes. And in August of 85, then, Sammy was invited to join the band. And Eddie had said at the time, he said, the band as you know it's over. Dave left to go be a movie star. And then Eddie joked that I guess David had the balls to actually ask Eddie if he'd write the score to the film. And so that was the end of the David Lee Roth era and the beginning of the Sammy Hagar. A lot of people, I was, what was I, 15, 16 at the time that this happened? I was a huge Sammy Hagar fan prior to him joining Van Halen. I mean, Sammy had a lot of great hits. And I think a lot of people don't realize that how shocking that was that Sammy had actually joined the band, because he was a really popular, successful solo artist. And he was originally the frontman for the band Montrose, who was an underrated band that a lot of people love. He went solo in 76, but at the time that he joined Van Halen, Sammy Hagar had 14 albums on his own, and he had a lot of classic hits like There's Only One Way to Rock, I Can't Drive 55, I'll Fall in Love Again, Your Love Is Driving Me Crazy. And he also wrote the big hit for Rick Springfield, I've Done Everything for You. That was a song that Hagar had originally recorded and written himself. So it was a little shocking for some of us that was like, why would Sammy join the band? The funny story about that was that Geffen Records, who was the label that Sammy was on, was really pissed that he joined Van Halen. And he had to renegotiate the contract with Geffen. And they ended up with signing a contract where Sammy had to do one more solo album for him. And remember, this was coming off of his album VOA, which had I Can't Drive 55, Two Sides of Love. I mean, that was I think it was his most best-selling album to date. And you can see why the record company was kind of pissed about this, right? So negotiated he would do one more solo album, and then they actually negotiated Sammy into getting some of the proceeds from his first album with Van Halen, 5150. So Geffen Records, even though they weren't the record label, I think it was Warner Brothers, got some of the proceeds from Sammy as a negotiation to getting out of his contract with Geffen. So, and then at the time, the band finally announced that Sammy was the new lead singer, and I think it was at the MTV Music Video Awards that year. And a lot of fans were torn. I mean, I was one of them. You know, I loved Van Halen. I loved David Lee Roth Van Halen. They were just such a fun band. Their music was so fun. And I was one of the guys, like everybody else, that was, you know, that was kind of skeptical about Sammy Hagar joining the band, where we started calling him Van Hagar. And so you were either a Van Hagar fan or you were a Van Halen fan, which meant that you were a fan of the David Lee Roth era. You know, Sammy went on to record 4 albums, 4 hit albums with Van Halen. All 4 went number 1. But, you know, when they were recording the album Balance, they just couldn't agree. Sammy's been quoted as just saying, you know, I would suggest black, Eddie would suggest white, and then I would give in and say, fine, let's do white. And then he'd go, no, I want to do black. There was a specific song that Sammy had written that he really wanted on this album that Eddie didn't want him on there, or didn't want the song on there. And this really created a rift. And this is, again, back in 1995. And then the story was told that Eddie got pissed off, left the studio, and went and hung out with David Lee Roth at his house. And that was Hagar's final straw. Hagar claims he quit the band at that point. Eddie claims they fired him. So, it doesn't matter. And then a year later, Roth joined the band again, only to record a couple of songs for their greatest hits. So they had a couple new songs off that. But the funny part was that this was in 1996 at the MTV Music Awards. There was talk of a reunion tour, which was planted by David Lee Roth. Now, Eddie came out backstage after, the awards and was like, no, there's no reunion tour. And he was talking about that he had hip surgery. He had upcoming hip surgery and that he couldn't tour. Roth actually, while Eddie's being interviewed, interrupts Eddie during the interview and says, tonight it's about me, man, not your fucking hip. And as you can imagine, they had to actually restrain Eddie. And he said to David, he said, if you ever speak like that to me again, you better be wearing a cup. And so that was the end of David Lee Roth's second stint with Van Halen. And then one of the biggest mistakes, I think, that Van Halen moved on to Gary Cherone, the old the ex-Extreme singer. That was a low point for the band, and I think fans finally came to, because that lasted 3 years, and the fans finally came to the conclusion that Van Halen either had to have David Lee Roth or it had to have Sammy Hagar as the lead singer. So lo and behold, Hagar returns in 2004. He produced 3 songs for the band's next greatest hits album, The Best of Both Worlds. They did an 80-day tour, and Hagar was just like, he was quoted as saying, this was some of the most miserable, backstabbing, dark crap I've ever been involved with in my whole life. The Van Halen brothers were also angry that Michael Anthony had been playing with Hagar solo outside of the band, and so Hagar at that point left the band, never to return again. And then 3 years later, the brothers decided to fire, longtime bassist Michael Anthony, one of the original members, and they replaced him with Eddie's son Wolfgang on bass. And then again, they brought back David Lee Roth for another tour. That same year, to me, one of the saddest parts was that same year they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and only Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony showed up for the induction. David, Eddie, and Alex did not. It's just sad when you get inducted into something like that. You got to be able to put your crap aside to get honored. And so, throughout all these years, these 2 singers would go back and forth. David Lee Roth would refuse to play Sammy Hagar songs when he was with the band. After a 2013 concert, I think it was, Hagar had said in an interview that Roth's vocals were pretty rough. But, there was a big fallout between him and Eddie, Sammy and Eddie. David Lee Roth and Eddie always hated each other. But it did come out that before Eddie died in 2020 that Sammy had made peace with Eddie. They did it privately, and Sammy had said that they both agreed just to keep it quiet so no reunion rumors would get started. And so that's nice to hear that they were actually able to make peace, because those 2 were really, when Sammy joined the band really did take a step forward in how great of songwriting that they were capable of. Not that the stuff with Roth wasn't, but, it was a little bit more of a serious tinge to it, and I love both bands. I really do. But the question of the day is, now, before I go, I just saw an interview with both, with Hagar and with David Lee Roth. Supposedly there's no bad blood between them anymore, which I find 40 years of it, that it just disappeared, would be very shocking. So, but here is the question of the day. Who was the real frontman for Van Halen? Who did you prefer? Who do you think was the better frontman? Was it David Lee Roth or was it Sammy Hagar? So please, again, this is a participation part of the show. Please put in your comments who you think is the better of the two frontmen and why. And then we'll talk about that in the future again, because I'd love to come back to this, because I don't think it's as easy as a question as you may think it is. So that's where we're at. All right. So again, please participate. Put your comments in the comment section. Who was the better frontman? Was it David Lee Roth or was it Sammy Hagar? So we're going to move right away because I'm running out of time and I want to get to another game for you guys. This is a fun one. I hope you enjoy it. Please play along.
Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me.
She was more like a beauty queen from a movie scene.
His mother told him someday you will be a man, and you will be the leader of a big old band.
On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair.
But something touched me deep inside the day the music died.
The SoundLott proudly presents the Dramatic Rock and Roll Lyric Challenge.
Here are the rules of the challenge. We will play a dramatic reading of a lyric from a song. You have to figure out what song it is and the artist who performed the song. Shall we get started?
Song number 1.
Have we become a habit? Do we distort the facts? Now there's no looking forward. Now there's no turning back.
And the answer is We Belong by Pat Benatar.
Song number 2.
I went to a shrink to analyze my dreams. She says it's lack of sex that's bringing me down. I went to a whore. He said, my life's a bore. So quit my whining, 'cause it's bringing her down. And the answer is Basket Case by Green Day.
Song number 3.
I'm like a one-eyed cat peeping in a seafood store. I'm like a one-eyed cat peeping in a seafood store. Well, I can look at you till you ain't no child. No more.
And the answer is Shake, Rattle, and Roll by Big Joe Turner.
Song number 4.
The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound when the wave broke over the railing, and every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing.
And the answer is The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot.
Song number 5.
Each of us, a cell of awareness. Imperfect and incomplete genetic blends with uncertain ends on a fortune hunt that's far too fleet.
And the answer is Free Will by Rush.
Song number 6.
I'm a winner. I'm a sinner. Do you want my autograph? I'm a loser. What a joker. I'm playing my jokes upon you, while there's nothing better to do.
And the answer is Breakfast in America by Supertramp.
So how did you do? Sometimes it just takes the right melody to make the right words soar. Join us again next time for another dramatic rock and roll lyric challenge.
Dramatic. It was very dramatic, and I'm curious how you guys did. Put in your comments how many of them you got right. When I went back and listened to it, there was a couple that stood out to me right away that I got. We Belong, just because it's one of my favorite songs. The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, I think, was an easy one for me. And then I'm a winner, I'm a joker, that one, it took me a little bit to get it, but I finally did get it. So that is the dramatic rock and roll lyric challenge. So we're going to do that on every show because I think it's kind of fun to do that. See how much of your musical intellect that you have, and if you can recall. I'm one of those that I'm really terrible at playing games where I have to finish lyrics. And for those of you who know me, know that even when I sing with the band, I typically have to have lyrics up on the stage with me. I just have some weird mental block around it. My friend Mike gives me a hard time about it all the time, saying it's in my head, and it probably is. It's one of those things where once you start to rely on it, you get paranoid that you can't do it without it. So it's one of those things that I'm going to try working on. So see if I can get through that block. But I'm terrible at games like that. There's a card game out there, I think, called Finish the Lyrics, or a game show, something like that. I'm just terrible at it. I'm okay at reading lyrics and determining what song it is, but we've got a few more games coming up on our next show. We've got another one called Reverse Rock and Roll Trivia, where we'll actually play the song in reverse, and see if you can figure out what song it is. It's actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be when I went through it. The other one is Music Mythbusters, where we talk about a music myth that's out there about rock and roll, and you have to determine whether it's real or it's false. That's a fun game that's going to be coming. And then we have the first of many singing challenges that I get to do, and the first one is going to be what we call the Meatloaf Singing Challenge, and that's where a randomizer picks out a song, and I have to try to sing a piece of it at least, like Meatloaf. And that's going to be fun. I'm a big Meatloaf fan, so I'm hoping I can pull that off. But that's our first show. It's in the can. I really, again, want to thank you all for listening. I really do hope that this show becomes very interactive and that you guys are very involved in what it is that I'm doing and what I'm talking about, the different games to play. Give me your feedback. I really want to hear your feedback and figure out what it is that you guys want out of this show. And hopefully I can deliver that for you. So I thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time. We lived, we loved, we laughed, we cried. We swore we'd never let our love die. were young and had naive hearts. So here we stand, here we are, strangers who've been torn apart by a life we were never warned about. But I've loved you for so long. I thought our love was so strong. Where did we go wrong? Where did we go wrong? You're the only love that I've known, the only one that's ever shown a way to reach inside my heart. So tell me, where do we go from here? How do we find a path that's clear, find a way to fall in love again? 'Cause I've loved you for so long. I thought our love was so strong. Where did we go wrong? Where did we go wrong? So long, I thought our love was so strong. Where did we go wrong? 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 Where did we go